All right. Today, we're going to go through a few slides of the PowerPoint, not many. And those that we go through, we're going to go through really quick. I'm thinking maybe 10 minutes of PowerPoint tops. There are a few notes to take, but it's really not that much. It's really just the names of a few different conflicts, some of the more notable rebellions from African peoples against European imperialism. You don't have to have a whole lot of information on each. The main thing is just to associate these rebellions as examples of people that tried to step up to these European invaders. Unfortunately, with superior technology and more money, I mean they lost, but they gave it a valiant effort, and really the rebellions we're going to talk about, they're heroic. I mean, these were heroes that fought in a conflict that they probably knew that they couldn't win, but they still had to try. So we are going to look at those just really briefly. Once that's done, we do have the crash course over imperialism I was talking about. That's about 10 minutes. And then we'll be done for the day. Again, we only have 30-minute classes today, or 30-minute-ish. I think some may shift a little bit. So we're going to get done what we can. Announcements are the same. Just a couple of reminders. If you're taking the AP test, your final payment is due next Friday. Next week, we've got an SAQ, we've got a DCA, we've got the notebook check on Friday. We also have your extra credit essay on Friday. So be prepared for all that. And here we go. Where we left off yesterday, the scramble for Africa had begun. 1870 to 1890, when most of it is going on, but there's some before, some after. European nations essentially split up Africa amongst themselves at the notorious Berlin Conference in 1881. And a variety of European nations, such as Great Britain, Belgium, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, and Portugal, all established colonies over the next 20 years or so. Now, that doesn't mean that there was no opposition. There certainly was. These are some of the examples, not all of the examples, but some of the examples of, opposition movements, rebellions, different groups that at least attempted to fight against this European incursion. Again, if nothing else, get the names. All right, that way you can at least bring up some examples of people that did stand against this incursion, even though they were literally outgunned and they were facing very modernized militaries, very powerful militaries, some of the most powerful in the world at the time. So in South Africa, we've got two big rebellions to talk about: the Xhosa cattle killing movement and the Anglo-Zulu War. Xhosa cattle killing movement. From 1811 to 1858, remember the British were in South Africa before the scramble for Africa began. The British fought the native Xhosa people who opposed all European rule. Between 1856 and 1857, many of the Xhosa tribe's cattle were dying from a mysterious illness, perhaps caught from imported British cattle. Anytime you have distant populations really coming together for the first time, I mean, there's going to be new diseases spread. The Xhosa didn't necessarily know exactly what was killing their cattle. Maybe it was interacting with British cattle that was imported. I mean, who really knows? But the Xhosa took this as a sign. The Xhosa began to kill their cattle and destroy their crops in the belief that these actions would cause animistic spirits to remove the British from their lands. Again, the Xhosa had these kind of animistic, beliefs, in nature and in the very spirits in nature. And as a means of sort of sacrifice, they killed their cattle, who were getting sick anyway, and destroyed many of their crops, hoping that sacrifice would drive out the invaders. Problem is, it didn't. They essentially killed their own livelihood and ultimately killed themselves. Approximately 400 head or 400,000 head of cattle were killed, resulting in famine and the deaths of thousands of people. Next, also in South Africa, we have the Anglo-Zulu War. The Zulu Kingdom, a well-organized and centralized state in South Africa, was established under legendary warrior Shaka Zulu in 1816. Definitely one of the most powerful groups, kingdoms that Europeans had to fight against. In the 1870s, the British fought the Zulu Kingdom in the Anglo-Zulu War. Although early battles went in favor of the much larger Zulu forces, the British eventually won the war due to superior firepower. I mean, the Zulu were fighting with antiquated weapons. They were fighting primarily with spears and shields and bow and arrow. And the British were a modern military. I mean, they had cannons. They had, at this point, probably heavy artillery. They had Gatling guns, machine guns. And, when a modern army goes up against a group that doesn't have those same tools, even though numerically they may have a lot more people, eventually over time they're going to lose. The fact that the Zulu were able to fight for so long and score some early victories is a testament to their warrior spirit, to the fact that they were heroes fighting for their homeland. Again, the animations are kind of weird. Next, we're mainly going to like West Africa. Well, this is kind of all over. Some of it's in West, some of it's in the Northeast. But again, these are just some further examples of people that stood up against the foreign aggressors. Samari Touré War, 1883 to 1898. This was a chieftain of the Mande tribe who established a powerful kingdom in West Africa. They opposed the French, their efforts to annex the territory. Eventually, Samari Touré was captured, he was exiled, and once they lost their leader, that essentially ended the conflict. Similarly, you have the Mahdist Revolt, 1881 to 1899. I mean, we're looking at a pretty long-standing conflict. Muhammad Ahmad, a Sudanese Islamic cleric, so we're looking northeastern Africa, declared himself the Mahdi, or guided one. And he wanted to restore the glory of Islam in East Africa and formed an army to oppose the British, who, of course, were largely Christian. The movement disintegrated after Muhammad's death. This happens sometimes. When a rebellion or a movement is based on the leadership of one charismatic individual, sometimes when that individual dies, there's no one left that really can fill their shoes. Finally, and pretty impressive for the day, Ya Asantewaa War, 1900. Throughout the 19th century, the British had made attempts to subjugate the Ashanti Empire in West Africa, fighting numerous wars. Ya Asantewaa, a mighty warrior queen, led Ashanti forces in the fifth and final war of the rivalry. After the British victory, Ya was exiled and the Ashanti territory became part of the British African colonies. Got a good quote from this lady. This female warrior queen. If you, the men of Ashanti, will not go forward, then we will. We, the women, will. I should call upon my fellow women. We will fight. We will fight till the last of us falls in the battlefields. Again, there were uprisings. It's not that Africa and its people laid down and let people like the British come in and just take over. But ultimately, time and time again, the British, the French, and others with their superior military forces, they were able to gain this territory. Eventually, they were able to conquer just about all of Africa. Now, I've got a political cartoon here real quick, and there's all sorts of questions embedded, but we're not going to worry about those. I just want to show it to you. It's a pretty famous political cartoon that I think summarizes European attitudes towards Africa in general. This political cartoon is called the Rhodes Colossus, and we've actually mentioned this guy before. This British cartoon illustrates the dream of imperialist Cecil Rhodes to build a railroad from Cape Colony in South Africa to Cairo in Egypt, and thus assure British rule over a large part of Africa. We've talked about this before. If you can, build railroads to unite your territories, it's going to help you further your control of those territories. It's going to help you get soldiers in and resources out. And I mean, railroads have always been an essential part during this time period of empire building. Rhodes, we talked about before, he had formed the De Beers Consolidated Mines Company in 1888. He amassed a huge fortune from its effective monopoly of world diamond production. De Beers was one of those first transnational corporations we talked about when we did our Industrial Revolution PowerPoint. So this is the Rhodes Colossus. It's a pretty famous one. You look for stuff related to imperialism. This is one of the first things that comes up. Here you have Cecil Rhodes, and he was a racist. He was big time in favor of imperialism, and that's how he was making his money. robbing Africa of its mineral wealth, specifically diamonds. And here you have Rhodes, standing with 1 foot on South Africa, 1 foot on Egypt, bigger than Africa itself, above Africa itself, superior. He's got strings in his hands. Maybe this is representing the railroad, or maybe it's representing the fact that to him, Africa is his puppet. Its people are under his control. You think about the characteristics of a puppet. It's mindless. It can't do anything on its own. It needs some greater force to manipulate it. Guys, that was the idea. That's the attitude that Europeans came in with. Remember, they believe in white man's burden. At least they say that they believe that. It's really just an excuse to go and do what they want anyway. But this is something that would further that idea. And if you look at how he's dressed, he's dressed for adventure. He's willing to come in and use violence if necessary. I mean, he's carrying a gun. I think this summarizes perfectly the attitude that a lot of Europeans had at the time. And it's really messed up and it's really demented. But it's a good illustration of what white man's burden and you could say social Darwinism is all about. So the last slide we're going to do today is right here. And again, it's got a bunch of questions, but I'm not going to mess with that. I just want to kind of show you what's going on here. By the time you get to 1912, just before World War I, this is Africa. I mean, you've got the British with probably the most territory. The French are second. The French territory, though, you got to understand a lot of that's the Sahara. Now, there are some very valuable areas there. There's a lot of gold in West Africa. There's a lot of petroleum in West Africa. But I think if you look at the totality of it, the British probably got the better end of things. Is Nevaeh in here? Who's that? Oh, there she is. Have a good one. Guys, by 1912, you've got 2 countries exactly that are independent. And these are worth writing down. Over here in the east, you've got Ethiopia. Now, Ethiopia was given, I guess you could say, during the Berlin Conference to Italy. You got to remember, Italy's kind of a very new country at this point. Not very powerful, not very wealthy, still trying to get their act together. And frankly, even though they did send in their military to try to defeat Ethiopia, Ethiopia was too strong. The resistance there was too much for them. So the Italians they can't take it. They do take some of the surrounding land, but Ethiopia itself, Abyssinia, as it was known at the time, was a very powerful kingdom in its own right. And due to that, the Italians weren't able to take it over. Kind of aiding with this, one of the reasons that other Europeans probably didn't help them out much was the fact that Ethiopia was already Christian. One of the few territories in Africa that had much earlier converted, I believe, during the European Crusades. So, the rulers of Ethiopia, they could kind of appeal to the invaders and say, hey, listen, you say you're coming here to civilize us and advance us as a people. We're already Christians. You don't need to convert us. So Ethiopia retains its independence. It's worth noting, though, later on, right before World War II, when Italy does become a major power, they go back to Africa and they do take over Ethiopia, kind of correcting what they felt was a sign of weakness from much earlier on. The other place is today Liberia. Guys, this is independent territory by the time you get to 1912, but it's also kind of under the protection of the country that helped form it. This starts off as a colony of the United States. Back in the early 1800s, before the Civil War, before the end of slavery, there was already a strong abolitionist movement growing. People saw that slavery was evil, especially in the northern part of the United States. People were calling for it to be abolished. There is this organization that's formed called the American Colonization Society, and they kind of formed this plan. Hey, what if, for these freed slaves, for these freed African Americans, what if we gave them the opportunity to go back to Africa? Which, again, sounds kind of ridiculous because at this point, likely none of those people had ever even been to Africa. They were born in the United States. But still, looking at the systemic racism, looking at all the inequality in America at the time. I'll wait till you're done.
Oh, you can finish.
Okay, just hold on. I'm almost done. Looking at all the inequality, I mean, some people did buy into this. So the U.S. government actually went over there, negotiated with some tribes. This is before the big scramble for Africa, and they purchased this land. And a small number, about 12,000 African Americans did sail over and establish a colony there. For a while, it was technically an American colony. It kind of officially got its independence, I want to say like in the 1840s. The U.S. recognized that really officially during the Civil War. And from then, it was kind of on its own. But because it was kind of sort of an American territory, the European powers left it alone. Go ahead. So that's where we're going to leave off today as far as the PowerPoint is concerned. I'm hoping I can finish this on Tuesday. I think it's very likely. We may just have to move kind of quick. But as of now, all the dates we went over, we're going to keep up with those. Okay, so the SAQ ideally is going to be on Tuesday. The test will be on Thursday, and then the notebook check and the extra credit will be due on Friday. Kind of close out. And this will preview some of the stuff that we're going to talk about next week, but it's a really good review of just the concept in general. We're going to watch our crash course over imperialism, and it's one of the better crash courses, in my opinion. You don't necessarily got to take notes, but pay attention. I think that this is going to kind of help you just moving forward with the topic. So here we go. Once this is done, we'll call it a day.
Hi, I'm John Green. This is Crash Course World History, and today we're going to discuss 19th century imperialism. So the 19th century certainly didn't invent the empire, but it did take it to new heights, by which we mean lows, or possibly heights. I don't know. I can't